Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Making History. My name is Brian, and I am currently alone here in our podcast studio. If this is your first episode, usually we do this thing where I'm like, my name is Brian, and then my wife says, my name is Katie, and then I say, where the Hesses, but this is not going to be a typical episode. This week has been a little crazy. Kids have been sick. Katie was sick. We just haven't really had an opportunity to record an episode per usual. So instead, we've got something really special in store for you guys. A few months back, I had an opportunity to sit down with a friend of mine. His name is Chris Dupré. And I've heard some really amazing stories in my lifetime, amazing testimonies, but I've never quite heard anything like the story that Chris has to tell. I've met some really interesting people, and he's the only person I've ever met that I know of who has actually met Jesus face to face. And so maybe you're listening to this and you wonder, what do I mean by that? Am I serious? Either way, I just want to invite you to listen to the whole conversation. We had about an hour together, and so unfortunately, many details of his story were left out because there's just a lot to it. But his story is absolutely amazing, and I promise you will not be disappointed by listening to it. So I don't want to take any more time away from the conversation. So here it is. I hope you enjoy. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Great to be with you.
Great. It is so good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think the first time I met you or heard you speak was, I think it was 2015 or 2016. And it was in a time when I was in a ministry school. My wife and I were. And we had a lot of opportunities to hear from a lot of different people. And it was all amazing, but there was something different that you carry, that you have, that has had a very long-lasting and profound impact on me and my wife.
Wonderful.
So I want to thank you for just being you, for being who you are.
I've tried to be someone else when I was younger and it didn't work, so people are stuck with me.
So, Chris, I was hoping, I know you have, you're an amazing storyteller and you have an amazing testimony. So I was hoping that we could use this time just to hear a little bit about you, a little bit about your past. And I guess at the end of the day, what in your life, what are some of the things in your life that have happened that have led to you becoming the person that you are today?
Well, I was born at a very early age. No, sorry. I lived in a kind of nowadays it's a little bit more normal, but back then it wasn't. I was born in 54, and my parents, as my mother said, I was the third of three. She said, it's a miracle that you're even here. I didn't understand what that meant until I found out that they had separated, got back together, separated, got back together. And in a small moment of time when they got back together, I was conceived. And as she said, that was a miracle that happened. I grew up with a lot of tension in the home. And I didn't know what the source was until I got a little bit older. A little bit older was 8 to 10 to 12, somewhere in there. My mom finally left my father. He was abusive, verbally, physically, in a number of ways. And Mom became my hero. But then I began to hear the backstory, which I didn't know as a little kid. You don't know these things, and you live in them, and they begin to determine your temperament, your outlook of life. This is what a father does. This is, other households are probably like this. And coming to find out that other households weren't like that. There were good men, happy households. But the story that I began to be unfolded to me was I knew my dad was in the Army or the Air Force or something. I knew he was in the military during World War II. And then come to find out that he was a bombardier in a B-17, which nowadays, now that I understand what that had to go through, my father I couldn't figure out why he joined the Air Force because he was afraid of heights. So he's afraid of heights, so he joins the Air Force.
Interesting, yeah.
And then they put him, he's a very intelligent guy. They They put him as a bombardier because there was a new instrument. Up to that time, people were just carpet bombing, and they couldn't get the precise area to bomb. And so they sent him back to the States to learn this new instrument that helped more precision bombing. But the thing was, if I've been in B-17, the front part is all this clear plexiglass that is the nose, and his head would be right next to the plexiglass. So every time he would take off with being afraid of heights, he's lying on this area, and just he said it was just horrible.
Wow.
So he goes through mission after mission. They get hit. He comes back. They're fine. And finally on his 13th mission, they were going into Berlin. They were on their way into Germany. There's a line between France and Germany that Hitler had built up, and it was hard to get through, and it finally fell. And so the flights are going through. And he ended up over Brandenburg, Germany, being shot down. And so you hear the term, oh yeah, they were shot down, and he parachuted and he was okay. Well, there's a whole list of things that happened, and when he's looking out windows, seeing planes explode, seeing guys fall to the ground, he's 19, 20 years old at the time.
Wow.
And I picture myself at that age up there doing that, and I can't imagine what that would be like. And he goes to the turret gunner, the gunner below, who was his best friend at the time, and he tried to pull him out, but it was dead weight, and he looked at him, and he had lost his head.
Oh.
So his best friend, so he turns, and he's vomiting, and tail gunner's already out, and one of the side gunners in the middle, one had jumped, the other, the plane had rocked, hit his head on the ceiling, and he was unconscious. My father took his ripcord, held onto it, and then pushed him out the window, and the guy lived.
Wow.
And, yeah. So it was just an incredible thing. And I remember meeting him years later, and he grabbed my cheek, and your daddy saved my life. And
wow.
And he was so appreciative of every day of living. And that's what I remember, just meeting him, thinking, that man understands something I don't understand, because I never went through what he went through. And so my dad goes to the clearing, and he's about ready to jump out this, they call it a window, but he's about ready to jump out, and because of his fear of heights, he stops and he pulls his head back. The second he pulled his head back, this piece of shrapnel comes and grabs, it was so close, it grabs the leather cap that he has on and sticks it to the ceiling of the plane. And he had that scar on him all those years later.
So had he not pulled his head back, would have been a different...
We would not be talking today.
Right.
Yeah. And,
wow.
Yeah. So he's really scared, but he's got to jump. The pilot can't jump until he jumps. So he's screaming at my father to jump so that he can jump.
Right.
And so my father finally jumps, and 3 seconds later, the plane explodes. My father is convinced the pilot is dead because he waited for my dad, but 3 seconds later, it explodes, sends him falling backwards and head over heels because of the force of the explosion. He said it was like a man with a 10-foot fist that just pumped and smacked him. So he almost goes out, but he doesn't. But when you fall, he's up 25, 30,000 feet. That's where they usually were at about 30,000 feet. And he begins to fall, and you don't pull your parachute at the top, because otherwise the whole battle area, you're just floating.
Right, kind of a sitting target.
You're sitting target, and he's watching guys who hit their parachute right away, and planes are just going through them. Mm-hmm. The Messerschmitts and other German aircraft they're using them as target practice. And so he just is falling and falling, and you wait till you're 1,500 feet, and then you pull the ripcord. And they knew 1,500 feet because every time a plane would go off or a plane would land, the pilot would yell out 1,500. And so everybody memorized what 1,500 feet looked like.
Wow.
And so he gets to 1,500 and he pulls the ripcord. And he said, If you've ever seen a 1940s, 30s, 40s parachute, it's very different from today. It's a backpack.
Sure.
You strap it in really well. Well, back then there were two sets of circles, and you put your legs through one set and your arms through the other, and then you pull it. And so he said, I learned a very valuable lesson that day. Never put your parachute on upside down. So when he pulled the ripcord, the parachute just flipped him right around. Now he's going down head first. And basically, if you have updrafts and you know, things are going on in a positive sense, you can land between 10, 15 miles an hour, maybe 20. But if not, you're going to land 20, 30 miles an hour, and you have to know how to fall. Well, you don't land on your head at 30 miles an hour.
They probably weren't practicing that.
No, they weren't practicing that. Yeah, he said the practice actually for that kind of thing is you walk up into a stand and there's hay, and it's 10 feet tall, and then you jump into the hay and roll. That's their practice. That was it.
Oh, wow.
Paratroopers are different. They practiced from the plane. Everybody else, they didn't waste that time or money.
Yeah.
So he realizes, oh no, you know, he pulls himself up and grabs a hold of the cords, but he has to hold them so that if he lets go, he goes back head first. So he's holding on, and then he's trying to steer with his other hand.
Yeah.
And he's steering towards trees, which if you go into trees, you get caught. The dog come, it tells the Germans where the soldiers are, and then they shoot you in the trees. And he steers around the trees and sees that there's a field. So he starts to go towards the field, and he realizes it's a field of corn that had been cut in the fall. So it's like 10,000 swords sticking up in the air. I mean, I grew up in farm country, and you know, when corn is cut, we used to cut it down at the base and use them for swords.
Sure.
And literally, you could kill someone because it's winter in Germany, and these stalks of corn are up. And he pulls away at the last second because there's an open area with no corn growing, and he realizes literally 10 feet away, it's because corn doesn't grow on rocks, and it's a rock. It's a monster boulder. So he hits the boulder, he pushes his right leg against the boulder, breaks in 9 places, and falls and rolls to a hedgerow, pulls the parachute, puts him around him because he's freezing, and he just passes out. And he's woken up by a little girl who wakes him and says, "Parlez-vous français?" And he goes, "No," he didn't speak French. And,
yeah.
You know, she goes, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch?" And he goes, "No." And she finally looks, and I love this. He said she had attitude by this time. She goes, "Well, do you speak English?" He goes, "Yes." And he passes out, and he wakes up in the home of a gentleman who's in the French underground.
Okay.
And so it's like, yay, this is good. But he's got this thing wrapped around his leg, just a temporary something to hold it together. And his host says, "Lieutenant, I'm sorry that this happened to you." And my dad's like, "Oh, well, this is wonderful. Thank you for having me. There's a warm fire in the fireplace, and the guy's got some soup for him, and he's feeling pretty good." He goes, "Well, your leg is bad." He goes, you have 3 choices. You can stay, keep your leg like it is, and you will get gangrene and die. Or we have a doctor friend, and he can come and he can remove your leg. It would be from the knee down, and remove your leg, and you can go home and you'll live and you stay with us. Or we can take you to the Nazi headquarters in town. And because you're an officer, they will probably put you in some kind of a hospital. So, as I like to say, my dad was attached to his leg. And so they took him and put him in the back of a truck, took him into town. He went into a German hospital. Well, it was a hospital for American and British soldiers. The thing was, you were supposed to put at the top of the hospital on the roof some kind of a Red Cross symbol or something that said there are patients here. This is a medical facility.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do that. They put them in a warehouse for the Americans and the British to bomb. So the hope was that they would bomb. The Americans would bomb their own people.
Wow.
British would bomb their own people, and they did. When my dad was there, a whole wing of a hospital was totally decimated.
Wow.
And he said he heard a thump. And in the morning, when he looked out the window, there was an American bomb stuck in the ground that did not go off. Had it gone off again, we would not be talking here.
Wow.
Because it would have just taken out that whole section of the hospital. But it didn't go off. And so my dad had this sense that I'm supposed to be alive.
Right. Maybe
yeah.
one thing is just a coincidence, but
Yeah.
all these things stacked up.
Yeah. One, the shrapnel. Two, if he'd taken one more second to jump,
Yeah.
he probably would not have lived.
Yeah.
And then three, here's this bomb that doesn't go off. And so I hope the story is not going too long or too boring at this point, because this is what shaped him, and what shaped him shaped me.
Sure.
And he ends up getting the leg better. He gets medication for it. One of the things about the Germans is that they respected position. So if you were an officer, they treated you differently than, at least in that setting of a hospital.
Sure.
But then he gets to the Stalag where they took him, which was Stalag Luft 3. That's what it was. Stalag Luft 3. I'm thinking of Hogan's Heroes at the moment. Stalag 13. It was nothing like Hogan's Heroes. Stalag Luft 3, which actually, there's a movie from the early 60s called The Great Escape. Steve McQueen and some others are in it, and that's the Stalag that he went to.
Oh, okay.
So, but the history of that Stalag is just the year before, 76, if you've seen The Great Escape, 76 prisoners escaped through a tunnel that they made. And they caught 73 of them. 3 of them got away and were returned back to England. They were British soldiers, airmen. And the 73 that returned, Hitler was so incensed. He said, shoot them all. And I think it was Goring that said, don't shoot them all because they'll do that to our prisoners. If we shoot all their prisoners, they will do the same to us.
Yeah.
So he ordered 50 of them to be shot. So they took them out in a car and gave them a drink and said, hey, just made them look like nothing was going to happen. And then when they turned around and looked a different way, they shot them in the back of the head. So 50 of them were shot.
Wow.
They were put into a pit. They were burned, and their bones were brought back to Stalag Luft 3, so that as soon as anyone came into the Stalag, there was a container set up that said, escape is not a game.
Wow.
And what you saw when you walked in would be the bones of 50 men who had escaped.
Wow.
And were caught. And so that's what my dad was greeted with when he got there. And one of the things that by this time, this is January of 1945, and by this time the German army was decimated. So they were filling it in with older men and younger kids. And the younger kids had been brought up in what was called Hitler Youth, and they hated Americans. They hated the British. And so one of the guards there had been involved in the Hitler Youth, hated my father because he had gotten medication that he felt should have gone to Germans, not to the pig Americans, as they called them, pigs. And so he took it upon himself whenever he could to abuse my father with the butt of a gun, kick him in the leg where his leg was broken.
Wow.
And there were little rooms and places that he was taken and beaten in. And so my dad came out of the war. My dad's nickname before the war was Nice Guy Dave. They called him Nice Guy. And so he comes out of the war, and he's still Nice Guy Dave, but he's gotten another personality, kind of like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So
Sure.
you meet Dr. Jekyll, he's brilliant, he can be funny, but then you meet Mr. Hyde, and he can rip you apart.
Yeah.
So he was a teacher, and at school, all he had to do was come in and teach the class. He would tell stories. He was a great storyteller, and he'd tell stories of, World War II or World War One, where others that he knew had been a part of, and the kids loved him. He was a history teacher, so unlike some kids who grew up hating history because it was so dry, that was their kids' favorite class, because when he would get in and start talking about Thermopylae and the Greeks and all that went on, he'd give them names, he'd turn it into a story, and they're on the edge of their seat, that kind of a thing. And so everything was there. The books were there. He didn't have to pay for them. The electricity was there, air conditioning if needed, just all the things that when you walk in to a school setting as you're a teacher, all you have to bring is your knowledge and your ability to communicate. And he had that down.
Sure.
At home, he was in charge of the rent or the mortgage, electricity, water bill, taking care of the yard, just all the things that go with it. And that's where whatever switch was switched on or off, something was switched off. He had no ability to do any of that. He could not.
Wow.
He couldn't take care of his home. He couldn't. He had a wife. He had to take care of. Now he's got 3 kids, and I'm the youngest. And my sister got some physical abuse. My brother was sick most of the time, so my dad just basically ignored him as kind of a weak kid. And then I came along, and I was a strong young boy, athletic, always doing something, and I became for quite a while the one that he would take his wrath out on. And by the time I was 4, 5, 6, I just hated the guy, and my mother took us away, as I said, when I was 8. So here I am now, 8 years old. I hate this man, but I have no background as to what caused his persona. I don't know why he's the way he is. If you're a little kid, all it is that man hurts me.
Yep.
I don't like him, and I don't want to be with him. And suddenly at 8 years old, I'm not with him. And life suddenly got a whole lot better. And I'd come home, it'd just be my mother, who was just the most kind, loving, I remember coming back the first day of school, coming in the house for the first time without Dad there, and I can smell chocolate chip cookies being, baked.
Yeah.
And so I thought it'd be nice for you to come home to something special. And I don't think I cried at the time, but I remember some years later when I first remembered that, I just remember crying, thinking, wow, life is different.
Yeah.
With my dad, I would know what it was like, because if the car door slammed, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, my mother one time, she was cleaning some stuff out, and she saw the shoebox in one of the bedrooms way up on top of a closet. And she took it down, and it was all the bills that we had. And my dad couldn't take it. He didn't want to see them, so he put them in a shoebox and put them up high in one of the bedrooms. So if I don't see it, I don't have to deal with it.
Sure.
The problem was we lived, by the time I was 8 years old and we moved to 35 Buffalo Street in Marion, I'd lived in about 12 places because we kept getting kicked out of places. And, something about you have to pay the bills. It's really kind of an important thing. So growing up, I would see him. He did have one instance when I was 12 where we're in Montreal, and he misunderstood something I said. He literally misunderstood it. And he turns around in a busy Montreal street, and the next thing I know, his right hand smacks me in the face And I go down, and I'm almost knocked out. 100 people, 200 people around. They don't know what to do. They form this little circle. They're about ready to jump my dad. And my brother was with me, and he comes over, and he kind of shakes me, and I wake out of it and picks me up. My dad's already walking. He just said, stay here or follow me. And, we're 12, 13 years old. Yeah. So my mom found out about that, and that was the last time we took a long trip with my dad. That was the end of it.
Sure.
And growing from that point on, I met the Lord. My sister, I come home from college, and my sister's acting all weird. I can't quite figure that out. My mom's a little different, and my brother's different, and what's going on? And turns out my sister met the Lord. She prayed with my brother and my mother, and they both became believers. And I'm the token non-believer in the house, and everybody's they're trying to save me. They're doing their best. They're bringing their friends around.
Yeah.
That was the big one. They'd bring their friends around, and their friends were so weird. It's like, I don't want this. They're weird. I'm this one gal that my sister brought. I won't say her name. I can't remember her name at this point, but she really tried hard to get to be the one to pray with me to save my soul. And I just remember that I told my sister later on, I said, that was the worst expression of Christianity I've ever seen. And don't bring anybody else back like that. So please don't. So my cousin's getting married. It's August of 73, and I go to the wedding reception, and my sister brought a friend, and she said, Carol, I think I'm going to go over and talk to your brother about the Lord. And my sisters don't. My brother will never get saved. I've brought so many people home, and he just rebukes them, rebuffs them. He won't get saved. I got saved that night.
Wow.
We came home. My best friend Tom was there, and the three of us are watching a movie, and my sister gets up, or I get up, and I go, hey, anybody wants some ice cream? So I go into the kitchen, I make 3 bowls of ice cream. By the time I come back, they're holding hands, and Tom's going, in Jesus' name, amen. I'm thinking, oh no, I've lost my best friend.
Right.
I knew the movie from 56, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Okay.
And, if you fall asleep near these pods, well, you're going to be an alien. And so I just felt like the invasion of the body snatchers came to my house and just took my best friend.
Yeah.
And he looks up and he goes, this is real, man. I'm thinking,
okay.
Oh, God, please. And so I went to bed that night. There's a knock at the door, and it's my sister. I said, yeah, come in. She comes in and she says, listen, I know it's really hard. You thought you lost your best friend. You haven't. You've gained a someone who is going to be even better. And I don't know. So I grew up Catholic. She says, listen, do me a favor. You believe in that Jesus is real, right? I said, yeah. You believe he's the Son of God, right? I said, yeah. You believe that he came to die for our sins, right? I said, yeah. So how about if we just hold hands and you turn that into a prayer to thank him? I'm thinking, I'll do anything to get you out of my room. So I believe you're the Son of God. I believe that the Father sent you. I believe that you came and you died for my sins. And I'm praying this prayer. And then she says, and that you would come into my heart, and you'd come into my heart and be my Lord and Savior. And I'm just saying the words and be my Lord and Savior. And suddenly when I said to come and be my Lord and Savior, everything clicked.
Wow.
Just in that one moment was like, if this is all true, I would be an idiot to not embrace this one who did this for me.
Sure. And how old are you at this point?
I'm 19.
Okay.
Yeah. I just had a year of college where I basically blew my brains out with alcohol and drugs.
Sure.
And so I said to my mother after that first year, I said, I can't go back yet because it'll kill me.
Okay.
And so this is August, and it's about time for me to go back. And I prayed, and I just suddenly knew my life is going to be different.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go back to the world that gripped me and pulled me into a world I'd never known. And it pulled me in fast and it pulled me in hard.
Right.
And so I knew I had enough negative ability to withstand things. I was, for whatever reason, I needed to grow. I needed to mature. And so I decided the best way to mature for me at that point was to give a year just to grow in God, to understand more fully his word. And so I just gave myself that year, which now has turned into 51 years later.
So let me ask you, and I think this is where the story is heading because I've heard you share your story before. And I know it's probably right around this time in your life when you find yourself in a room eating a bologna sandwich.
The bologna sandwich.
And this is, for those of you who've never heard Chris's story, this is the best story about a bologna sandwich you'll ever hear. Would you mind?
Oh, sure. I love it. Yeah, I every day growing up in school, my mom would pack me a bologna sandwich, one piece of bologna on white bread, Wonder Bread.
Great.
With mayonnaise. And I'd have on the side either a little box of raisins or a banana. That was my lunch every day. So now I'm 19, 20 years old, and I'm still eating a bologna sandwich every day. I just love bologna sandwiches. I haven't had one in years, but it's because I'm married to Laura, who does not buy bologna. And so I come home. I lived across the street from me was where I worked. So it was literally a 3-minute walk, something like that. So I have an hour. And so I come back to the house. I make a bologna sandwich. And I'm on the second floor of a home that's divided into apartments. The first floor had some believers in it and had a guy that was a phenomenal guitar player. Actually, since I know he moved to Nashville years later, became a session player, and now he's a major producer in Nashville. But he lived right underneath me.
Wow.
And so the people that worked the church shift in a local factory, they would work overnight and they'd get off in the morning. And the first thing they did on every Wednesday was have a worship time at lunchtime on that day. So I'd come home and I'd stand above the radiator because if I really wanted to, I could look down into the room below. I didn't, but I would stand above the radiator and I'd eat my bologna sandwich. And this was my thing I did every Wednesday. So they're playing and they're singing and it's beautiful, and just hearing him play guitar, and I'm standing there and I had my eyes closed and I eat my bologna sandwich. Now this is upstate New York. I'm just 10 minutes from Lake Ontario. And
okay.
So it's cold, it's winter, lake effect snow is happening all the time, and I'm eating my bologna sandwich, and the next thing I know, I feel this breeze, and I'm thinking, I have 2 roommates. I'm thinking, which of these idiot roommates left the window open in the winter here in Rochester area? And sure enough, so I open my eyes, and I am not in my room. And I looked down, and my bologna sandwich was gone. And that's the first thing I remember. It's like, darn it, where's my bologna sandwich?
I was really enjoying that.
I love my bologna sandwich. And so I'm more excited, or more focused on the bologna sandwich than the fact that I'm not in my room anymore. I could not have been asleep. Someone said, well, you were dreaming. No, it was lunchtime. I was eating bologna sandwich. I would not have gone home, go to bed, because I'd probably sleep for 2 hours.
Right.
And so I wouldn't do that. It'd be irresponsible. And so I look around, and I'm on a hillside, and I can look down, and there's Lake Ontario, people having a picnic, and they're just having the greatest time. I can smell hamburgers and hot dogs cooking. I hear the noise. There's dogs barking and running around. Then these people come by me, and I said, what's happening? Thinking they're going to tell me what's going on, and they just say to me, they're not listening to us. They don't want to know anything about the Lord. So we're supposed to meet him at the top of this hill. I said, meet who? And they just, the Lord. He's up. He's going to meet us at the top of the hill. I'm thinking, this is very strange. So they walk up, and I'm looking. I'm going, well, I guess I'd rather go be where the Lord is. So I walk up with them. There's about 30 of them. They're in a circle, and I'm thinking, okay, I really wasn't a part of this group.
I don't really know how I'm here.
Yeah, how am I here? And are they looking at me like, what are you doing? Why are you here? You weren't helping us. You weren't. So I'm just standing in the circle, and then suddenly I see that they're looking up, and I look up, and this man is coming down with a white robe, barefoot, and he's facing the other direction, and he's just coming down really slowly, and everyone is so filled with excitement. I'm going, that can't it can't be Jesus.
What was in that bologna?
Yeah, what was in that below? What? It's a new batch, and he's just coming down, and he suddenly just lands there, and everyone's looking at him, and I'm hoping that it's Jesus, but I can't really see his face, and he begins to look at one person after another. And he's looking at one person after another, and he's slowly going around the circle, and I know he's going to come to me, and in my thinking, he's going to go, "Who are you? Well, why are you here? You weren't part," So he slowly goes around, and suddenly I get a side view of his face, and I realize that really looks like Jesus. And he's got this look on his face, and I realized later that if someone is smiling really big, or someone is frowning really big, from the side it looks the same. You almost can't tell the difference. You don't know, are they angry or are they really happy? And I'm thinking, oh no, he's angry, but people are responding well. And then he finally gets it far enough around, I see it's the biggest smile I've ever seen. And he finally gets around to me, and he looks at me, and he hasn't said a word to anybody, but they've responded. I can see them respond. And I'm thinking, how are they hearing? Because I've got good ears. I can't hear a thing. And he looks at me, and he says, "I love you with a wild love," but he doesn't say it. But the words themselves go right into my ears. And I'm thinking, wild. So I've grown up, I just grew up. I'm about a year old in the Lord now, 20 years old. And you do things decently and in order.
Uh-huh.
So the word wild does not come into that world.
Sure.
And he's like, "I love you with a wild love." And my thinking was, well, that's not right. Wild's not good. He goes, "No, I love you with a wild love." And I said, "But wild?" And then he looks at me, and we're going back and forth. I'm thinking, and he's hearing. He's thinking, and I'm hearing. And he looks at me and goes, "Yes, I love it with a wild love, because no man can tame my love for you." And I just went, oh, that's what wild really means. It can't be tamed. And I just said, "Then love me as fully as you can." And he went around. When he was all done, he said, "It's time to go." And he lifts up, and people are lifting up here and there, and I'm trying to, come on. I used to be a good jumper, but that's not helping, And suddenly I began to lift into the air. Now, one of the things I did before I did that was I reached down and I grabbed grass. I put it in my mouth. I did that twice. And once when he first was coming down, and then once when he's going up, just to see, is this real? Because if it's not real, then the grass, it's going to taste like some kind of a mint candy or something. And no, it was real. I spit it out twice because it was grass and it was disgusting. And so he's rising up into the air, and we begin to all rise, and we just keep going. And I'm watching the ground change. I'm watching the temperature change, and it's getting colder and a little windier as we go up. And there's a platform way up in the air. We're 5 miles, and he sets us on the platform and goes, "Stay here, and I have some things to take care of, and I'll be back." So I'm sitting on the platform. My legs are dangling over the edge of the platform. I'm thinking, I wonder if I fell off, if I'll lose my salvation. I'm just, you're thinking the strangest things. And suddenly, and I look around and nobody else is sitting on the edge. They're all standing kind of close to the middle because, you're 5 miles in the air. There's no walls. It's just this big platform. So suddenly I feel something next to me, and I look over, and there's this white tunic with its bare feet and little holes in the feet. And I look over out the side of my eyes, and I see his left hand, and there's a wound in his hand. And I'm going, oh my gosh, Jesus is sitting next to me. And all I can say is that we parked the car here in your house. We walked through, and we came into this room. I can remember it like it was half hour ago.
Yeah.
And you're sitting in front of me. That's as real as it was then. I was eating a sandwich, and I'm in a different place, but the realness of the moment never changed.
Wow.
Even up in the air. I'm sitting there going, I was eating a bologna sandwich just 10 minutes ago, and now I'm 5 miles in the air, feeling the breeze and the temperature change, and now Jesus is sitting next to me. And then I thought, well, if this is the end times, then Jesus is next to everyone. So I turn around to look, and all the other 29, 30 people are there looking at me, and I can hear them say, why is he with you? Wow. And I just went, I don't know. Was he going to suddenly take his left hand and put it in my back and push me off? I didn't quite know what the next move was going to be. So he's just sitting there, and I realized he's wanting me to communicate with him. And here's the funny thing of life is that from that moment on, he is always near me. Always. And we're always like, oh, I wish God would speak. I wish God would speak. And the fact of the matter is he always is. He's got his word. The Holy Spirit does that as well. But he's always there. But oftentimes he just waits for us to honestly communicate who he is to us. Am I your caretaker? Am I your money giver? Am I your whatever? Or am I something more to you than the giver of things? I'm the giver of life. So I'm sitting there trying to think of what to say. And I'd been saved for a year. And, back then in the Jesus movement, a year was a long time. And
yeah,
I was an expert.
Sure.
So I was about ready to say to him, Lord, great job with that book of Deuteronomy. I literally was going to tell him that he did a good job writing Deuteronomy. And the funny thing is, I think about it years later, and I realized, you know what? Until I read the Bible, I thought Deuteronomy was probably a gastric disease or something. What's wrong with him? He's got Deuteronomy. And so I said, Lord, I just want to, and I got that far out, and I couldn't turn to look at him because I was thinking back on that year of high school and that year of college, and I was so filled with shame. That had never been dealt with. The shame of hating my father, the shame of just the lifestyle that I had had. And I was saved, and I knew that my sins were forgiven, but nobody ever went after shame. And that's one thing now that, sometimes you can walk into a building and you go, I can smell gas, and somebody else, no, there's no gas. There's gas somewhere. And I can smell shame.
Wow.
I can be around certain people. I can watch their eyes. I can watch their demeanor. And if they talk about themselves, then shame appears. We as Christians gather together to look good to each other, and we do shame management. We manage internally our own shame a lot so that we can come across well. And so the moment up there, he finally, I stop, and he finally realizes, I know he realizes that I can't say any more. So he takes my head, he turns and takes my head like this, and he's going to talk to me, but with shame, because he's like this, I can put my head down. And I put my head down. I said, Lord, I'm just sorry. I'm just sorry. And now he takes the back of my head and my chin, and his hands were like a vice grip. And he holds me like this, and I cannot move. My head is right there, and he's here, and I'm here, and I'm looking at him like this. I can't move. And he just looks at me, and I can see his eyes, the brown eyes and the little red lines around, and his beard was not trimmed nicely. It just went up on that little hill there, and it went down here, and I'm just looking, but the look of love on his face, I just called it wild love. Mm. The wild love that he expressed to me. I was undone, and I just kind of closed my eyes. I just kept shaking. I'm so sorry. He goes, shh, 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 shh. Look at me. Look at me. And then I just opened my eyes and really looked, not at the lines, not at the beard. I looked at the whole picture of the whole face. And I was just consumed by the fact that this man loves me fully, unconditionally, and it'll never change. There's no shadow of turning. And the God that I see now I know how he sees me. Now I know how he feels about me.
Wow.
And he takes my head and puts it on his chest, and I can now feel his heartbeat. And he just begins, I love you. You need to know. Actually, before he did that, he held me like this and looked at me. He goes, you need to know I love you. And for who you're called to be and what you're called to do, you need to know how deeply you're loved. And then he took his arms and put my head on his chest, and everything got quiet, and I could hear his heartbeat. He wanted me to hear his heartbeat, that it beat for me. And this ball of fire shot out of his chest, shot into my chest, boom, and smacked me. I went back, and I'm thinking, I'm falling off, this is it. And I fell, and I just fell, boom, fell back into my room. I'm there, the bologna sandwich is over on the floor. I was undone. I almost didn't care about the bologna sandwich, but I did pick it up and eat it. But I'm crying. And while my head was on his chest, I was just bawling and bawling and bawling. And I went into my room. I remember laying down, looking over at the time. I've got about half an hour at a time, and then I need to get back to work. And I'm crying into my pillow, and I don't know how much time has gone by. I just am crying and crying and crying. And when I'm done, I looked at my pillow, and it was soaked, and I picked it up, and it's dripping from the bottom. And I just set it over on the side, and I looked at my mattress. I put my hand down at my mattress, and I pushed down. When I pushed down, water just shot right up. I had cried, soaked my pillow, and soaked my mattress.
Wow.
And I realized after that, someone mentioned my father a day or two later, and every time someone talked about my dad, this thing inside of me would just rise up, and there was hatred. And I remember somebody mentioning that, hey, you're going to see your dad at Christmas, and how's that going? And suddenly I was like, yeah, I will see my dad. There was no pain, and I just realized everybody has their idea of how the Spirit of God works, and how does God deliver people from different things, and seeing Jesus delivered multiple demons from these women, and I just realized at that moment I was delivered. I was God's love delivered me from hatred, and I still didn't like my dad, but there was the thing of wanting him dead, the thing of never wanting to see him again. Suddenly it was like I was excited to see what's God going to do with this. I don't know what he's going to do with it, but he's going to do something with it, and my life changed in two ways. One was just that whole deliverance concerning my dad, but the fact that I can see anytime I want, I see the picture of the face of God smiling with wild love at me, and I never question the goodness of God for me. It's just there. Even my wife is like, something happens, and how you doing with that? And I said, well, I'm fighting some things, but he just loves me. He's so good for me.
Wow.
So that was the major shift in my life. Yes, I did pray to receive the Lord, but the revelation of the affection of God, that's what changed me.
Wow. How long was it before after that experience, that you felt comfortable to talk about it with people?
Oh, years. I didn't tell
Sure.
anybody. We had a couple of people that came through the church and would tell stories, and they were so far out. And the people afterwards, like, did you believe that? No, I don't believe that. And so I didn't want to be one of those people that, oh,
Wow.
Chris, you were asleep. Come on now, you had a dream. You had a bologna sandwich, and you went to bed, and you woke up, and they got confused. And I wasn't going to tell anybody. So I literally went years without saying a word to anybody. I just figured I had an experience. And then after a little while, I went, maybe I didn't have that experience. Maybe I was dreaming. And then I just realized, no, I had it. I saw him face to face, changed my life. And the specifics of the day, the demand of work, being responsible to get to and from, I had to have had that experience,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to remove it. It wasn't a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Paul said, I was in the body, out of the body, he didn't know. And when I read that, I just went, yes, I get it. I don't know what happened. All I know is my bologna sandwich wasn't there, and then it was again. So there you go.
Wow.
The saga of the bologna sandwich.
Yeah. Best story I've ever heard about a bologna sandwich.
Best story of bologna sandwich. And you know what? My whole thing was when he said, you need to know how deeply I love you, and for what you're called to do and who you're called to be, you have to know this. And then my life has been about unfolding the affection of God. Didn't think about it. And then I put two and two together years later.
Sure.
And I went, oh my gosh, that's what he told me. He said, and so the need for people, and I watched the instant that I understood God's affection, the depth of it. Now, when I see him face to face, I'll know the real depth of it. But it keeps getting deeper, and Ephesians 3, the length, the width, the depth, the height, every direction that you go, there's more, to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge, which means that when you've got knowledge, there's something past it.
Yeah.
And so life is about length, width, depth, height. Every direction I go in him, there's more of his affection waiting for me still, no matter where I go. So that's my life, and that's my heart, is to, in whatever gifts or whatever weakness that I have in areas, to be able to bring that revelation of God's heart for people. Because nothing changes people like the revelation of his affection.
Yeah. And, not that I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with you, but it's something that you do, and it's noticeable.
Oh, good. I'm glad. As opposed to, really? Is that what you do? Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. So it's very possible. I'm sure there's a couple people that think that, but.
So, and I know in 7 minutes we can't cover the rest of the stories that you could tell, because I know that everything you just shared still leads to kind of a crescendo moment with your father.
Yeah, well, I can do that in 5.
Let's go.
So years went by, and the Lord kept saying, what are you going to do with your dad? And I said, I want to love him. And he said, honor your father and mother. So I'd send him cards, and I'd do the things that would honor him as a man, but I just kept my distance. I couldn't love well, but I could honor. And so July 4th, 1982, my daughter was just born. My second daughter was born. And it was July 4th. It was favorite holiday. Lord said, go on over. And I'm on my way over there. And suddenly he says to me, internally, really strong, go face to face with your father today and forgive him. And my wife looks at me because I'm like, no. And I'm driving. She goes, what is wrong with you? I said, the Lord just said I'm supposed to forgive my father. She goes, you did that. I said, no, face to face.
Wow.
And she goes, oh, no, because she knew my dad. So I get there. I said, Lord, I'm going to put this little thing out there for you. If he's by if he's by his garden all alone. Well, my father's never alone by the garden. He's always showing off his garden. We have a lot of first cousins, 40 first cousins, and they're all married, and they bring their kids.
Oh, okay.
So when we have a big family thing, it's a big family thing.
Yeah.
And so I know he's not by the garden. So the fleece was, he's got to be by the garden by himself, because I'm not going to do this in front of somebody else and embarrass him.
Sure.
That would not go well. So I get there, and he's remarried, and I said to his wife, my stepmom, I said, hey, Marion, where's Dad? She goes, oh, he's out by the garden all by himself. Good time for you to go out. So I go out by the garden, and there he is. And I would shake his hand from a distance. I always kept it way out there. And he's showing me the garden. Hey, look at this, look at this. And I said, Dad, before you go any further, can I just say something? And in the car, I had come up with all these things of what I was going to forgive him for. I forgive you for that being punched down in Montreal. I forgive you for all the times you took a belt to me. I forgive you for all the times you pushed me or kicked me or slapped me or snapped your neck or your knuckle on my head, and then I would go out. And I had all this list of things that I was going to forgive him for. And he goes, yeah, what? What do you want to talk about? And I totally looked over at my brain where I'd written everything down, and it was like this little angel was taking a hose, and hosing it down.
Wow.
I could not remember a thing he'd ever done for me or to me. And I was like, I literally could not remember him hurting me. But I know that he did. So I just said, I just want to say that I love you and forgive you for everything that ever happened when you lived with us. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to say. And the Lord just said, put your arm around him. He needs your arm around him. So I put my arm around him. The second I touch his shoulder, he begins to wail. He is crying and wailing, and there's people in the other houses in the neighborhood, and they're looking over. And it's funny because there's 20 people on the deck. 30 feet over there, there's family, and none of them are watching. But these other folks, they're all watching, and he keeps getting lower and lower, and he's going to fall. And so he puts his arm around me to hold on to me so he doesn't fall. The second he touches me, I start to wail. And the two of us are just going back and forth and back and forth, crying and crying and crying. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, we're just filled with snot and tears and drool. And, we get all done. We don't know what to say. And I just realized he's embarrassed. Whatever reason he's crying, I need to help. So I'm filled with everything. And I said, Dad, he goes, what? And I take my hand, nice tomatoes. And he realizes what I'm doing. I'm cleaning up, and I'm saving him from an embarrassing moment. And he does the same thing. Did you see my green beans? And we go through that 3 or 4 times, and finally, we clean ourselves up, and my arm is around him. His arm is around. He's never held me. I've never held him. And he goes, I got to go in the house and clean up. I said, okay. And later on, my stepbrother, no one was watching. No one was watching. And my stepbrother says, I saw what happened. I said, what'd you see? He said, I saw the two of you out there, and I saw you crying. He cried, and then you held him, and then you cried, and then you started throwing all the snot in the garden. And I said, well, then you watched what happened. And he said, yeah, your dad walked in. He looked at me crying. I said, Dave, what happened? He goes, I think I got my son back.
Wow.
He goes, oh. And so that night, when it came time to say goodbye, I didn't think twice. I gave him a hug. And he goes, we're hugging. And he just holds me like this. I said, yeah, we're hugging. He goes, well, then let's do this every time. And then one day I kissed him on the cheek because I'm a kisser and a hugger. He goes, whoa, 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 kiss him. I said, yeah. He goes, let's add that every time. So for the rest of his life, we hugged and we kissed, and, we had the most amazing time. He's in the hospital. They're doing some exploratory surgery, and the way that he expressed his love to me was like Jesus, holding my head, kissing me in front of doctors, blowing kisses, and just loving me all the way to the elevator. Told the nurse, turn me around, I can't see my son, so the nurse pulled the cart. He gets into the elevator and blows a kiss on his thumb. The elevator door closes, and my dad died on the table. And that was the last time I ever saw him. And all it did was infuse in me a father's love. Now it was real on a whole different level. And now I carry this the rest of my life, the image of a father who loves unconditionally.
Oof. Wow. Unbelievable. Amazing story.
I have said this to people. Had I not lived it, I wouldn't believe it. But there's nothing made up. There's nothing not real. And all it does is tell me how deeply real God loves me. But it's more than that. He wants me to know. That's the big one. He wants me to know.
Yeah.
And I want people to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me. Loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
I should mention, so not only is Chris an amazing speaker and storyteller, you're an author as well.
I am.
You have a couple books.
I've got a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But the one about this story is called The Wild Love of God.
The Wild Love of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which actually just got picked up to become a motion picture.
Right.
So that's kind of fun.
That's kind of
stages. Cool. Yeah, it's very cool. And as the producer said, I'm not spending a little amount of money. We're going to spend what needs to be done so this story's told.
Wow.
So that's what, God willing, I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. I know the last, for a couple of years, you would kind of come periodically and you'd come and hang out with us and you'd come and you'd speak. And I remember every time you were kind of talking about that process, that it was something that was in the works. And it's so cool that you're here this time. You're saying it's happening.
It's happening. Yeah. In the works meant it was being written and co-written and rewritten and getting out the tweaks and getting it down to the amount of pages it needed to be. And then someone had to say yes to it. And so they did. Contracts are signed. And now we're just going after investors.
Yeah.
Get what needs to be gotten so that we can give out what needs to be expressed of how God sees us. So
great.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate you being here.
I'm honored.
Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that. And once again, my name is Brian, and this is Making History, and we'll see you next time.